India-Fiji relationship is a relationship which has a historical background. It's a close relationship, and Fiji has an important role in the wider Indo Pacific as well. With me is the Deputy Prime Minister of Fiji to talk about this relationship. And let me start with how do you see this relationship currently? How will you characterize this relationship in the current era at a time when the global geopolitics is changing very fast?
Well, I would say that Fiji considers India as an old friend, a very historical friend, and a friend whose values are universal, which believes in democracy, human rights, media freedom, rule of law, and practice of good governance. So that relationship and the relationship that the current government would like to build on is to strengthen that relationship. We want a meaningful, more deeper engagement with India. And as you said quite rightly, India is a global power, and more so, as stated by the External Affairs Minister himself, Honorable Jaishankar, that India provides leadership to the global south. And within the Indo Pacific strategy, India has an important role. And Fiji, on the other hand, is the hub of the Pacific. It's one of the most developed economy. Fiji can, if it wants to, and this new government will do that, is to play a much more influential role within the Pacific region. And I can tell you, recently our Prime Minister made his first visit to Kiribati. Kiribati had decided, through other influences, to leave the Pacific Island Forum, which is a forum of political leaders within the region. And now Kiribati is back in the forum. And so Fiji plays a very, very important role. And to strengthen the Indo-Pacific strategy, the geopolitical strategy, and the geo-economic strategy, Fiji and India, of course with the other three countries, Australia, Japan and the US, will play an important role.
How do you see India's centrality in the Pacific?
Well, as I said, India is a global power. India has a lot to offer. India is the largest democracy, but more importantly, India provides a lot of cutting-edge entrepreneurship, innovation in the whole area of energy, climate change, and I saw this firsthand at the India Energy Week Summit in Bengaluru. The kind of products that India is developing is very, very interesting, and for small island states and many others around the developing world, India can provide that leading role in developing, climate-friendly, climate-resilient infrastructure, contribute to the whole process of decarbonization by looking at alternative sources of energy.
So a lot of things that both countries can work on, but there are also certain concerns regarding the Indian origin people in Fiji. You are also Indian origin. How can your government assure that their rights will be there under the current administration? We have seen in the past what has happened, history, which everyone knows.
Yeah, I think those people who always look at that compartmentalization perhaps get it wrong sometimes. I mean, we have a 143-year history in that country. By and large, of course, we've had political problems, we had coups, we had our own challenges, but by and large, the indigenous community and the major other community, the Indo-Fijian community, have worked together for 143 years. They get together, by and large, they do things together, and there is a leadership commitment, and especially with this government, to ensure that we run a very, very inclusive, free, open, transparent government, where everybody feels, I mean, the philosophy of our new government is working together. It's about partnership, it's about consultation and dialogue. And so I don't see any threat. And we don't see, we have different ethnic groups. We have different cultural practices. We have our own languages. And in fact, the new government has decided that both EAM, which is the indigenous language, and the Hindi language to be very prominent languages. We've just decided that both Hindi and EAM, the indigenous language, will be allowed to be used in parliament. So I could go to parliament and speak in Hindi. So I think some of those concerns are misplaced. It is coming from those people who themselves think that they can exploit, racial sensitivities, racial, challenges, and unfortunately, that's not the case with this government.
You mentioned Hindi, and India, in fact, the Indian External Affairs Minister is expected to travel to Fiji to attend the World Hindi Conference. So, how important this World Hindi Conference is for your government? And I would like you to answer that in Hindi for our viewers.
Well, let me just say this in Hindi. जो विश्व हिंदी सम्मेलन फिजी में होने जा रहा है, ये बहुत ही ऐतिहासिक है। ऐतिहासिक इसलिए है क्योंकि वहाँ जो भारतीय मूल के लोग बसे हुए हैं, जो गिरमिट प्रथा के नीचे गए थे, उनकी जो भाषा है, उनकी जो संस्कृति है, सभ्यता है, वो भारत से बिल्कुल जुड़ी हुई है। और जो हिंदी भाषा है, उसका प्रचार और प्रसार पिछले 140-103 वर्षों से हो रहा है। हिंदी को स्कूल में पढ़ाया जाता है। पिछले दिनों में हालांकि कुछ कमजोरियां उसमें थी, लेकिन ये जो नई सरकार है, हमारी जो सरकार है, हिंदी और जो हमारी आदिवासियों का भाषा है, उसकी प्राथमिकता हम बहुत तेज़ी से करेंगे, देंगे। और इसीलिए ये जो विश्व हिंदी सम्मेलन है, ये सही समय हो रहा है और उस समय हो रहा है जहाँ पर हिंदी की जो प्रचार प्रसार ये सरकार द्वारा, हमारी सरकार द्वारा इसको बढ़ावा दिया जाएगा। तो ये बहुत ही ऐतिहासिक सम्मेलन है। और डॉक्टर जयशंकर जो भारत के विदेश मंत्री है, वो वहाँ पर रहेंगे। और भारत से बहुत लोग जा रहे हैं। हमारे जो अन्य डायस्पोरा कंट्रीज़ है, सूरीनाम, मॉरिशस, ट्रिनिडाड, गियाना, अन्य जगह से, पूरे दुनिया से लोग वहाँ पर जाएंगे। और बहुत ही सुंदर बात है कि विश्व हिंदी सम्मेलन इस बार फिजी में हो रहा है।
मेरे ख्याल से मेरा एक और सवाल आपसे हिंदी में होगा। अब अगर आप हमारे दर्शकों को बता सकें हिंदी में ही कि कैसे भारत और फिजी के जो रिश्ते हैं इस वक्त हैं, और एक तरफ से सम अप कर सकें रिश्तों के बारे में।
भारत और फिजी के जो संबंध है वो ऐतिहासिक है। और हमारी जो सरकार है उसकी बढ़ावा और देगी। हम ये विश्वास करते हैं कि भारत की जो आज की ताकत है, आज की जो पोजीशन है, आर्थिक दृष्टिकोण से अगर देखें आप, राजनीतिक दृष्टिकोण से, स्ट्रेटेजिक दृष्टिकोण से अगर देखें, तो भारत दुनिया का एक लीडर है। और भारत से हमारी संबंध को मजबूत करने में ना कि भारत की स्ट्रेटेजिक जो ताकत है उसमें बढ़ावा मिलेगी, लेकिन हमारे लिए, फिजी के लिए, क्योंकि हमारे पास एक छोटे देश के हैसियत से बहुत समस्याएं हैं और कई ऐसे समस्याओं को हम हल कर सकते हैं अगर भारत के साथ हम मिलकर काम करेंगे। और वही हमारी उद्देश्य है, वही हमारी सरकार की नीति है। और इसीलिए मैं पहला जो हमारे देश के अलावा देश से बाहर की दौरा है वो भारत की है। और मुझे बहुत खुशी हो रही है कि पिछले 2-3 दिनों में जितनी मेरी बात हुई है, विशेष करके विदेश मंत्री से और अन्य लोगों से, अन्य मंत्रियों से, बहुत ही सफल दिख रहा है। और हमारी जो संबंध है ये बिल्कुल मजबूत होगी भविष्य में।
So there will be strong relationship, but India's role in Fiji in terms of development partnership amid the COVID crisis, we all saw how India gave vaccines to the world. But what kind of support you're looking from India in terms of sectors like health or maybe sectors like defense? If you can elaborate on that.
Well, we've had some discussion with the Honorable External Affairs Minister, and we've had discussions on a range of issues which include health, which include energy, which include ITC. India's e-governance program is quite extensive. I have looked at it, I've understood the extensive nature and the way in which e-governance has contributed to the efficiency in governance in India is breathtaking. And obviously, India has a lot to offer in that area, and that's one area where Fiji would like to work with India. We believe that Indian economy, is the fastest growing economy in the world today. India has a lot to offer in terms of investment. Fiji is an ideal hub. So Indian companies, Indian investors, could use Fiji to, get into the larger Pacific region. And Prime Minister Modi visited Fiji in 2014. He's instituted this India-Fiji Cooperation Summit with the Pacific Island. There's been two held already. One was held in 2014 in Fiji, another one was held in Jaipur, and the third one is being held in Papua New Guinea. Okay. So the engagement of the Pacific, including Fiji, with India is on a right trajectory. It's accelerating.
And when we are looking at the third summit in Papua New Guinea?
In Papua New Guinea.
Any month we're looking at?
I don't have the exact date, but it's being planned for this year.
On defense, any partnerships are you looking at?
Well, I mean, current Prime Minister, studied in India in a defense college. We've had engagements in the past, and I'm sure when the Honorable External Affairs Minister is in Fiji, I'm sure there'll be some discussion in those areas as well.
So now going beyond India-Fiji relationship, there are a lot of things happening. One is that you've scrapped the security pact with China. What's the reason like?
Well, it's simple. We have had very historical relationship with our traditional partners. And as I said, this is a government which believes in the universal values of freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law, good governance. And we are identifying, countries, obviously, that uphold those values, and Fiji always had a relationship with it. Of course, China itself is a global power. China has its own system, its own way of doing things. They have their own challenges. In the Pacific, there have been countries which have, we have a diplomatic, long diplomatic relationship with China. So, that's there. But our focus and focus of many Pacific Island countries who believe in these universal values and who believe working together with some of our traditional partners is going to give them confidence to address some of the more pressing issues, such as the impact of climate change, extreme weather patterns. Many of these Pacific Island countries are very, very vulnerable economies, from that point of view. And so, historically, these are the countries that have always stood by us, and that's why, strengthening relations with them is going to be beneficial, sustainable, not only in the short to medium term, but also in the long term.
But do you think that China will be annoyed by you scrapping this pact?
I'm not sure whether we can, it's not for me to say whether, of course, as I said, different countries perceive different relationships, different configurations, different, disposition, in terms of where countries place themselves with others. As far as Fiji is concerned, we've said it very clearly that our foreign policy, our economic agenda is tied to some of those universal values, but also tied to this idea of a free Indo Pacific region, inclusive Indo Pacific region, and a region which is based on some of these principles. And so that gives us a very natural affiliation to countries, and India is part of the Indo Pacific strategy. Fiji has already been part of that, and we believe that the Indo Pacific economic strategy could be very, very beneficial for the Pacific in the long term.
But so do you think that the Pacific has now become a center of a geopolitical tension or confrontation with US, with China?
Well, there'll always be that kind of tension, that kind of contest for influence. It's up to us in the region. And as I said, the Pacific Forum, which is a forum for the leaders to discuss some of these fundamental issues. The region is united in pursuit of a free Pacific, free from any kind of influence that will disintegrate into divisions. There have been some attempts in that area, but I think by and large the Pacific is fairly united in terms of the Pacific Forum. And Fiji's Prime Minister, Honorable Sitiveni Rabuka, will provide that leadership. He has already demonstrated that. And he's a seasoned politician. He's worked with many of the Pacific leaders and leaders beyond the Pacific. And so we are very confident that the current Fijian government, will further unite the region and provide a solid framework to address some of the fundamental challenges facing the Pacific Island countries.
But will you agree with this statement that China is a force which is an aggressive force in the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific, and is the country perhaps behind a lot of problems in your part of the world?
Well, I mean, you can say that, and I don't know whether the term aggressive is the right term. I think China, as I said, is a big country. It is quite influential. It has its own ways of doing things. But equally important are other countries which are also very influential. India is a global leader. You have US, you have Japan, Australia. And Australia's contribution, aid motivation in the Pacific has been very, very positive for a very long time. And we believe that apart from India, Japan and the US, Australia has been at the forefront, in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy, in terms of this whole idea of a free Indo-Pacific region. And so the Pacific leaders, we in Fiji have a lot of confidence, not only in our relationships with India, but also our relationships with Australia, because Australia does provide that confidence to many of the Pacific Island countries in terms of how we can deal with these challenges. So, yes, I mean, powers will do whatever they have to do, but we have our own strategy, we have our own ways of doing things.
So my last question to you is regarding the Indo-Pacific. Your comments, you have already detailed Indo-Pacific, what's your view, but how do you see this concept as, and also the role by countries like Japan? You've already talked about Australia, but Japan as well when it comes to the Pacific region.
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, the Indo-Pacific strategy and the gathering of these four very important countries, Australia, Japan, India and the US, we don't see that as some kind of a new grouping. We see that as a more determined and more organized approach towards dealing with some of the challenges facing the Indo-Pacific region.
So
for example, we believe that there has been weakening of democracy around the world, and indeed within the Indo-Pacific region and also within the Pacific region. So part of the philosophy behind the Indo-Pacific strategy that excites us, because we have fought for democracy genuine democracy over the last several years, and the government that we have now is working towards strengthening democracy not only in Fiji but also beyond Fiji within the Pacific. And so there is a direct link between our objective of a democratic region with what is being offered by the Indo-Pacific leaders or the countries such as Australia, India, Japan and the US. So we don't see we don't see this as an entirely new thing, but we see this as a convening of minds, agenda into making the Indo Pacific region more free, more democratic, and based on those universal principles.
Sir, I've asked my last question, but since you mentioned the 4 countries, what's your view about the Quad? How does Fiji sees the Quad, emergence of Quad? Countries are saying Quad is Asian NATO. Will you agree with that line?
No, we don't. I don't think Fiji sees that way. I don't see, as finance minister, I don't see that in that way. I think from an economic point of view, as an economic strategy, it's a very good grouping because as far as Fiji is concerned, these are our major partners. Whether you look at it, what they do in terms of crisis, whether you look at our trade, whether you look at our tourism. I mean, Australia is our largest source market for tourism. Australia is the largest, contributor to Fiji in terms of, budget support and, the role they played during COVID. These are all exemplary, examples of relationship that we have built over so many years with all these 4 countries, including the US.
Well, thank you so much, sir. It was pleasure speaking to you and especially speaking to you in Hindi. But essentially, India-Fiji relationship is something that is closely being watched here in Delhi, not only because of what's happening in the Pacific, but also because of the strong linkages when it comes to the India link between the 2 countries. Thank you so much, sir. Pleasure having you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.